After the end of the world, human civilization was completely wiped out because of armies of the undead, zombies that never end. Cities were no longer habitable, period. A boy named Marco lives in the forest with his father since he was young to help him survive the dangers of the outside world. His father gives him a gun and tries to teach him how to protect himself, but Marco is too small and doesn't have enough strength to pull back the parts of the gun. When the weapon falls from his hands to the ground, he looks at his father worried and tense. Although they depend on each other to survive, his father is a man who rarely speaks to Marco. He doesn't seem to care how Marco is growing up or what his routine is. This makes the boy feel alone and isolated from the world. Despite this, his father never trusts this zombie world, and until Marco can defend himself properly, he forbids him from going outside their safe hideout. Marco is curious about the outside world. Each time he goes to get water, he makes a mark or carves a sign on a tree near the riverbank, and gradually his trail extends further and further into the unknown. One day while wandering in the forest, Marco finds a vehicle, an old inhabited caravan. He approaches cautiously and looks inside. Then he climbs through the window and begins to look around, eventually finding a toy on one of the shelves. But just as he's about to examine it, a dark figure suddenly appears inside the caravan. Marco, startled, freezes in place, stands in a corner, and trembles with fear. Fortunately, this stranger doesn't seem aggressive or intending any harm. When this figure extends the toy to him, Marco realizes it's another boy about his age. Sensing the boy's kindness, Marco takes off his earphones and invites him to listen to music together. And so these two lonely boys begin to find friendship with each other. Marco knows he can't tell his father what happened, so he carefully hides the toy that Miko, the other boy, gave him. Then he grabs his water bottles and runs back to the camp. But he's been gone for too long. His father is very upset and yells harshly at Marco, causing the chestnuts he had collected to scatter all over the ground, as his father thought Marco was just collecting chestnuts. His father lets it go and doesn't press him further with questions. Afterward, Marco begins to visit the caravan often and learns that Miko lives there with his mother. Unlike Marco's distant and cold father, Miko's mother often hugs him with tenderness and warmth, which affects him deeply. Marco tries to do the same when he returns home by wrapping his arms around his father, imitating Miko's mother, but his father immediately pushes him away. When Marco sees a picture of an unknown woman in their cabin, he gathers his courage and asks his father about her. His father doesn't respond and simply tells Marco to go to sleep. Once, his father had given Marco a storybook about a fairy who left the forest and went to a place called Stone Valley. Marco convinces himself that his mother is like this fairy, and that if he could reach Stone Valley, he would find her there. One day, Marco and his father go hunting in the forest as they always do. Suddenly, a series of gunshots echo from afar, and Marco quickly hides behind a large tree. He sees Miko's mother kneeling before his father, holding her arm in pain. To Marco's shock and horror, his father approaches her and, without a moment's hesitation, pulls the trigger and kills her. Marco, terrified, runs straight home and hides underneath his condition, and he stays there until 12 o'clock when his father finally returns. His state is completely messed up, his mind is gone, his hands are shaking as he gulps down a lot of alcohol, and he mumbles incomprehensible words to himself. Witnessing his father's unpredictable behavior strengthens Marco's resolve and determination to find the mother he never knew. The next morning, Marco packs his things and leaves the cabin without a word. He heads to Miko and convinces him to join the journey to Stone Valley to find his mother. But while walking through the forest, Miko suddenly stops and refuses to take another step. With no other solution, Marco tells Miko the truth. The boys are about to reach the edge of the forest when a strange figure appears in the distance. Quickly, they duck to the ground and hold their breath to avoid being seen. Cautiously, they follow a narrow path and find an abandoned car to hide in. As the sound of heavy footsteps grows around them, the boys anxiously look through the car windows. Suddenly, the terrifying sound of zombies banging on the car windows makes Miko panic, and Mark tries to calm him by covering his ears. He doesn't know what to do. But suddenly, out of nowhere, all the zombies outside fall to the ground. The car door opens, and Marco, still trembling from the shock, is surprised to see his father standing there. After carefully making sure Marco wasn't injured or bitten, his father takes a relieved breath. He completely ignores Miko, grabs Marco's arm, and insists they must return to camp immediately. But Marco resists, pulls his arm away, and yells at his father, feeling upset and hurt. His father is a monster who blames him for his mother's death. He even suspects that his father might be responsible for a death. His father doesn't have enough time to explain everything he knows, as the commotion they've caused will soon attract more zombies. With no other solution, his father quickly hides Marco in a safe place and goes back to rescue Miko. His aim is very precise, and with each shot, a zombie falls. It doesn't take long for him to clear the area and pull Miko to safety. At that moment, Marco turns around and freezes in place as a zombie sneaks up behind him stealthily. In a state of terror, he grabs his father's arm, his hands trembling as he aims the gun. The shot surprises his father, who is caught off guard. He runs towards Marco. But before he can reach him, a zombie attacks him and knocks him to the ground. Fortunately, his father manages to resist and narrowly avoids disaster. He quickly gets to his feet and runs to Marco's side, realizing it was a false alarm. He kneels to reassure Marco that Miko is safe. Then, with urgency and concern in his voice, his father urges Marco to return to camp before it's too late. At that moment, his father lifts his sleeve to reveal a bite he recently received on his arm. Despair overwhelms him as he grasps the meaning. He quickly moves away from Marco and chains himself to a nearby tree. Marco, sensing something is wrong, approaches his father. Here, his father finally reveals the truth. He didn't cruelly kill Miko's mother, she was already infected, and ending her suffering was the only way to save her from transformation. At that moment, Marco hugs his father tightly. His father wanted nothing more than to hug his son too, but he didn't want to risk infecting him, knowing his time was running out and soon he'll turn into a bloodthirsty zombie, and with a heavy heart, Marco walks while he still can. Marco is barely holding back tears, following his father's orders, holding Miko's hand as they both start walking down the path. After a short while, his father's eyes begin to turn white. Moments later, the silence of the forest is broken by a single gunshot. Marco stops for a brief moment, his heart heavy with grief, but he doesn't stop walking. Without his father's protection, he must become stronger. When night falls, Marco and Miko huddle under a large tree. Marco feels lost and doesn't know what tomorrow holds for him. But his mother's image gives him a glimmer of hope. The next morning, they continue their journey with the first light of dawn. After what seems like an endless, long journey, they finally emerge from the forest into a vast, open land before them. Walking along railroad tracks and continuing forward, not knowing how far they've gone, their food and water supplies are nearly depleted. Luckily, they happen upon a man sitting by the tracks, listening to a radio. The man looks Marco up and down, sizing him up, so Marco gathers his courage and asks the man for food. The man doesn't respond immediately, and instead says, "Where are you going?" Upon hearing their destination, he admits he wishes he could help, but explains that he can't leave the place at all because he's responsible for taking care of some children at his home. Marco curiously looks toward a nearby building with barred windows, and then realizes the devastating truth. The man's children became zombies, but he couldn't bring himself to hurt them, so he locked them inside. After filling their stomachs, Marco and Miko continue their journey. Their jokes and playful banter make the long journey feel less lonely and boring, and as the sun sets in the sky, they know they need to find a place to spend the night. Nearby, they encounter an abandoned train on the tracks, seemingly the perfect hiding place. Marco cautiously approaches and opens a small opening to peek inside, but discovers the train car is full of zombies. The boys are startled and stumble, but fortunately, the zombies are trapped inside and can't get out, and they breathe a sigh of relief. They quickly move away from the area. Not far from the village, two armed men suddenly appear, blocking their path. The unarmed boys can't defend themselves and have no choice but to obey and let those who are older make them get into a vehicle. After a long, tense drive, they're taken to a survivor camp. The leader, John Petters, examines the boys closely, his expression changing to great surprise when he realizes that both are unharmed and healthy. John explains the very terrible situation. Since the zombie epidemic began years ago, all children born to survivors have been infected with the virus, putting humanity on the brink of extinction. The sight of two uninfected boys fills John with hope, and he believes they might hold the key to curing the virus and saving humanity. But compared to the naive and calm Miko, Marco is much harder to control. This doesn't please John, who eventually orders Marco to be eliminated. The bearded man's heart can't bear to harm the child, so he secretly decides to let Marco go, but Marco isn't willing to abandon Miko. When the bearded man refuses to help further, Marco sneaks back to the camp alone. After finding a place for you, the two successfully escape from the guards. And they disappear into the night. The next morning, John discovers that the boys have vanished. Furious with rage, he doesn't hesitate to shoot the bearded man in the head as punishment for his betrayal. At this time, Marco and Miko have no idea how far they've run. Miko starts to get tired and wants water, feeling frustrated. Adding to their problems, Marco yells at him, complaining that he should have left Miko behind. But when he sees Miko's pleading, tearful eyes, his heart softens and his resolve weakens. Marco decides to search for water. He finds an abandoned building, enters it, and explores very cautiously. The place is filled with collapsed supplies. Builders were here before. Marco takes some clothes and finds half a bottle of water in a box. He goes out to the balcony and sees his first real view of the world outside the forest. The scene is devastated and hopeless as far as the eye can see. Most people have transformed into savage creatures. In this moment, Marco realizes the truth. The forest wasn't just his home, it was a pure, protected world. An innocent children's tale. His father had built it carefully to shield him from reality's ugliness. Suddenly, there's a noise from the ground floor. It turns out they were recorded, their location was discovered, and they were reached. John pulls out a weapon, ready to kill Miko without hesitation. But before he can act, a drone appears above them, making John stop and tense up. The next moment, we hear gunfire, and Jin and his men are immediately riddled with bullets and fall to the ground. Marco is hiding, watching in complete silence. Shortly after, 2 fully armed soldiers appear. Miko sees Marco shaking his head, signaling him to leave. But a brand accidentally makes a noise that immediately attracts the soldiers' attention. Miko watches silently as the soldiers quickly grab a weapon from the ground. Before they understand what happened, they have already killed Miko. Marco is devastated when he learns that Miko died trying to protect him. After the soldiers leave, he gathers his strength and continues his journey alone, still determined to find his mother. But this stone valley was just something his father invented, and Marco will never find anyone after leaving the imaginary shelter of the forest. Marco gradually begins to understand the bitter truth. In his anger, he tears the storybook to pieces and lets out a very muffled scream, but all that answers him is cold silence. Afterward, he climbs to the top of the mountain and looks at the vast city before him. With nowhere else to go, Marco curiously enters the city, a place he's never seen before. A huge stone is missing, and he has a vague feeling that this might be the legendary Stone Valley, but the city is still full of zombies and overrun by them. Marco cautiously avoids the zombies and eventually finds his way to an abandoned hospital. He opens a patient's room door and is surprised to see a woman in white, the figure he saw in his imaginary story that he remembers. He approaches her cautiously and extends his hand to embrace her. The woman quickly grabs his hand, but the next moment, Marco feels a sharp pain in the back of his hand. He turns and instead of the fairy's kind face, he sees the terrifying face of a zombie. Marco immediately runs for his life and blocks the door with an iron rod behind him. The zombie continues banging and pounding on the door, while he drowns in despair and helplessness, and Mark collapses in tears. The repeated blows of reality.